The sun rose over the flat plains of Nebraska, casting a golden hue across miles of open farmland. At the Silver Meadow Ranch, the morning began like any other. Chickens clucked near the barn, cows lowed in the distance, and the smell of fresh hay lingered in the crisp air. Inside the main house, 11-year-old Emily Parker sat at the kitchen table, her freckled face pressed against the window pane as she watched her favorite horse, Stardust, grazing peacefully near the old red barn. Stardust wasn't just any horse. He was a majestic black stallion with a white diamond on his forehead, a gift from Emily's late grandfather. The two were inseparable. Every day after chores, Emily would ride Stardust through the pastures, her laughter echoing through the fields. To her, he was more than a pet. He was her best friend, a piece of her family's history. But just 20 miles away, a strong wind blew over brittle brush and dry grass. The summer had been the driest on record, and the fire warnings posted across town were more than justified. In the small town of Stillwater, the local fire station was already on alert. Captain Jake Lawson, a veteran firefighter with 15 years of experience, stood at the ready. He had seen wildfires before, but this season felt different, angrier, more unpredictable. At 10:43 a.m., the call came in. A wildfire had broken out near Route 27, rapidly moving west toward the outlying farms. Jake didn't hesitate. He barked orders to his crew, leapt into his gear, and jumped into Engine 3. Within minutes, the team was racing down dusty roads, sirens wailing. Back at Silver Meadow Ranch, Emily's father, Tom Parker, stood outside with binoculars in hand. A thin plume of smoke curled in the distance, slowly growing thicker. "Emily, get your mom," he shouted. Emily jumped up from the table and ran toward the back of the house. Her mother, Sarah, was already gathering emergency supplies, first aid kits, bottled water, important documents. Tom knew they had to act fast. They had been through drills before, but this fire was closing in too quickly. He rushed toward the barn to check on livestock. The cows and chickens were easier to move, but the horses, especially Stardust, were another story. They spooked easily and could become unpredictable under stress. Meanwhile, the fire spread with alarming speed. Fueled by dry vegetation and strong winds, it leapt across fence lines and swallowed trees whole. Jake's crew was now within 5 miles of Silver Meadow. He checked his map and radioed in. "We've got livestock farms in the path. Evac orders should go out now." The Parker family scrambled to prepare. Emily held Stardust's reins tightly, whispering soothing words into his ear. The stallion's eyes darted nervously toward the smoke, now visible over the treetops. Other horses neighed in panic. The air smelled acrid. Suddenly, the wind shifted. What was a safe margin of an hour now became 15 minutes. Tom yelled, "We have to leave Stardust. We don't have time." Emily's eyes welled up. "No, I won't leave him." Sarah grabbed her daughter. "Emily, honey, we have to go now." The ground trembled as the fire approached. The roar sounded like a freight train. At that moment, a red fire engine came barreling up the dirt road, screeching to a halt in front of the ranch. Captain Jake jumped out, surveying the chaos. "Anyone still here?" Tom ran up. "My daughter's horse is still in the barn. She won't leave without him." Jake nodded once. "Show me the way." And with that, the rescue began. Captain Jake Lawson sprinted after Tom Parker, boots thudding heavily against the cracked earth as smoke thickened in the sky above them. The heat was already stifling, even though the fire line hadn't yet reached the barn. Jake covered his mouth with his sleeve and kept his head low. He could hear the frightened whinnies of the horses inside. They reached the barn doors. Tom threw them open to reveal chaos, for horses reared and pawed in their stalls, eyes rolling white in panic. Stardust was in the last stall, pacing and snorting. Jake assessed the scene instantly. We'll need to lead them out one at a time, he shouted. Can they follow each other? Sometimes, Tom said, wiping sweat from his brow. But they're spook bad. Stardust might calm them. Jake turned to his portable radio. Engine 3. I need 2 men with halters and masks at the east barn door. Bring a foam line for protection. We're getting horses out. Copy that, came the reply through static. Tom moved quickly, unfastening stall gates. Jake stepped into Stardust's stall. The big stallion reared back at first, then recognized the stranger's calm presence. Emily's scent still lingered on the reins Jake held. He spoke softly, firmly. You're a good boy, aren't you? Let's go see Emily. The horse snorted and allowed Jake to guide him out. The flames were now visible beyond the tree line, casting a hellish glow across the ranch. Sarah stood at the gate with Emily, who was crying but searching the smoke for signs of Stardust. I see him, she cried suddenly. He's okay. Jake handed off the reins to her as the crew arrived to help with the other horses. Foam sprayed onto the barn's side to keep it from catching. The cows had already been moved out to a pasture beyond the creek, where it was safer. Jake watched as 1, 2, 3 more horses were let out successfully. But then came a low groan, a dangerous sound from above. Roof's going, a firefighter shouted. Tom was still inside. Jake didn't hesitate. He plunged back into the barn just as the roof began to creak ominously. Visibility was near zero. Sparks rained down. He found Tom wrestling with the last horse, a stubborn Appaloosa named Juno. She kicked and shrieked, her nostrils flaring. Get out of here, Tom yelled. Not without you. Move aside. Jake grabbed the halter, pulling hard and using his body weight to coax Juno out. She finally budged, stampeding toward the door. Jake grabbed Tom and pushed him ahead. They cleared the threshold just as part of the barn roof collapsed in a cascade of fire and ash. Emily screamed, but her eyes never left Stardust. He stood beside her, unharmed. Jake and Tom fell to the ground, coughing, clothes scorched and blackened. But they were alive, and so were the horses. You did it, Tom gasped. Jake looked over at the little girl, hugging her horse. No, he said with a tired smile. She did. In the distance, the fire still raged, and more farms were at risk. Jake rose to his feet and turned to his team. Let's keep moving. There are more lives out there. And with that, they loaded up and rolled toward the next smoke column rising on the horizon. The firestorm rolled past Silver Meadow Ranch with merciless speed, scorching fence posts and blackening the once green fields. Though the house had been spared thanks to a last-minute shift in wind and the firebreak dug by emergency crews, the barn was a smoldering ruin. Its skeletal remains crackled and hissed as embers flared in the charred rubble. Emily sat beside Stardust under the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek, her arms wrapped around the horse's thick neck, face buried in his smoky mane. Stardust nickered softly, nudging her with his nose as if to say, We made it. Tom and Sarah stood a few feet away, watching the fire crews pack up. A paramedic was tending to Tom's arm, burned but not badly, and offering water bottles to everyone on site. Jake, now out of his heavy gear and down to a soot-covered t-shirt, approached the family. We've got a crew staying behind for hot spots, he said, voice raspy from smoke inhalation. You'll be safe here for now, but the road's closed for a few miles. Best to stay put until morning. Tom extended a weathered hand. I can't thank you enough. You saved my girl's horse. You saved all of us. Jake shook his head. Just doing my job. But I have to admit, that horse is something else. Held it together better than some of the guys I've seen in structure fires. Sarah gave a small laugh, tears in her eyes. He's family. Emily and him have a bond you can't break. As dusk settled over the ranch, The orange glow on the horizon finally faded, leaving only the occasional flicker of flare-ups. The night air was cooler now, though it still carried the smell of scorched earth. Jake walked over to Engine 3, where his crew was taking a breather. He climbed onto the bumper and sat with a bottle of water in hand, staring out across the blackened fields. "Hell of a day," muttered one of the younger firefighters, Mike Chun, sitting beside him. "Yeah," Jake nodded, "and it's just the start of the season." Back at the tree, Emily was quiet. She gently brushed Stardust's coat with her sleeve, pulling twigs and ash from his mane. She looked up as her father approached. "You okay, Pumpkin?" She nodded slowly. "I was really scared, Daddy. I thought I'd lose him." Tom crouched beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were brave. I know it was hard to leave the house, but you stayed calm. You helped. Stardust is here because of you." She smiled faintly, her fingers curling into Stardust's mane. "Do you think the barn can be rebuilt?" "We'll rebuild it together," Tom said firmly. "Might even build it better." Morning came slowly, golden light creeping over a changed landscape. Birds cautiously chirped from blackened branches, and small clouds of dust rose with each step on the dry earth. A convoy of emergency vehicles returned to assess damage, check for flare-ups, and bring food and supplies. Among them was a trailer from the local animal rescue group. Jake met them at the gate. "Parker Ranch," he said. 4 horses, 1 cow pasture, chickens mostly accounted for. 1 barn lost. Family safe." The rescue volunteers nodded and got to work inspecting the animals and offering aid. A young woman named Dana, approached Emily with a bucket of water and fresh feed. "He's a beautiful horse," she said, watching Stardust. Emily nodded proudly. "He's my best friend." Dana smiled and looked at Jake. "Word's already spreading. They're calling you the horse firefighter at the station." Jake chuckled. "Guess I'll need a new badge." Silver Meadow Ranch had survived. The fire had taken a piece of it, but not its spirit, and certainly not Stardust. The road ahead would be long, filled with repairs and tough days. But for now, under the light of a new day, hope returned to the plains. Jake turned back to his truck and paused. Emily waved at him. He raised a hand in return. "See you around, Captain," she called. He smiled. "Count on it." The firestorm rolled past Silver Meadow Ranch with merciless speed, scorching fence posts and blackening the once green fields. Though the house had been spared thanks to a last-minute shift in wind and the firebreak dug by emergency crews, the barn was a smoldering ruin. Its skeletal remains crackled and hissed as embers flared in the charred rubble. Emily sat beside Stardust under the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek, her arms wrapped around the horse's thick neck, face buried in his smoky mane. Stardust nickered softly, nudging her with his nose as if to say, "We made it." Tom and Sarah stood a few feet away, watching the fire crews pack up. A paramedic was tending to Tom's arm, burned but not badly, and offering water bottles to everyone on site. Jake, now out of his heavy gear and down to a soot-covered t-shirt, approached the family. "We've got a crew staying behind for hot spots," he said, voice raspy from smoke inhalation. "You'll be safe here for now, but the road's closed for a few miles. Best to stay put until morning." Tom extended a weathered hand. "I can't thank you enough. You saved my girl's horse. You saved all of us." Jake shook his head. "Just doing my job. But I have to admit, that horse is something else. Held it together better than some of the guys I've seen in structure fires." Sarah gave a small laugh, tears in her eyes. "He's family. Emily and him have a bond you can't break." As dusk settled over the ranch, the orange glow on the horizon finally faded, leaving only the occasional flicker of flare-ups. The night air was cooler now, though it still carried the smell of scorched earth. Jake walked over to Engine 3, where his crew was taking a breather. He climbed onto the bumper and sat with a bottle of water in hand, staring out across the blackened fields. "Hell of a day," muttered one of the younger firefighters, Mike Chun, sitting beside him. "Yeah," Jake nodded. "And it's just the start of the season." Back at the tree, Emily was quiet. She gently brushed Stardust's coat with her sleeve, pulling twigs and ash from his mane. She looked up as her father approached. "You okay, Pumpkin?" She nodded slowly. "I was really scared, Daddy. I thought I'd lose him." Tom crouched beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were brave. I know it was hard to leave the house, but you stayed calm. You helped. Stardust is here because of you." She smiled faintly, her fingers curling into Stardust's mane. "Do you think the barn can be rebuilt?" "We'll rebuild it together," Tom said firmly. "Might even build it better." Morning came slowly, golden light creeping over a changed landscape. Birds cautiously chirped from blackened branches, and small clouds of dust rose with each step on the dry earth. A convoy of emergency vehicles returned to assess damage, check for flare-ups, and bring food and supplies. Among them was a trailer from a local animal rescue group. Jake met them at the gate. "Parker Ranch," he said. 4 horses, 1 cow pasture, chickens mostly accounted for. 1 barn lost. Family safe." The rescue volunteers nodded and got to work inspecting the animals and offering aid. One, a young woman named Dana, approached Emily with a bucket of water and fresh feed. "He's a beautiful horse," she said, watching Stardust. Emily nodded proudly. "He's my best friend." Dana smiled and looked at Jake. "Word's already spreading. They're calling you the horse firefighter at the station." Jake chuckled. "Guess I'll need a new badge." Silver Meadow Ranch had survived. The fire had taken a piece of it, but not its spirit. And certainly not Stardust. The road ahead would be long, filled with repairs and tough days. But for now, under the light of a new day, hope returned to the plains. Jake turned back to his truck and paused. Emily waved at him. He raised a hand in return. "See you around, Captain," she called. He smiled. "Count on it." The 5th morning after the fire dawned with a soft patter of rain on scorched soil. It wasn't much, just a spring drizzle, but it felt like a blessing. The earth drank greedily as droplets fell on charred grass and cracked dirt, and the ash began to settle, binding into the land once more. The storm had passed, and life was inching back. Emily stood on the porch of the farmhouse, with a flannel blanket draped over her shoulders, watching the rain fall in silver threads across the yard. Stardust stood in the corral, head lifted to the sky, as if enjoying the rare moment of peace. Her dad joined her, 2 steaming mugs of cocoa in hand. "You ever think about how quiet it is now?" she asked. Tom nodded. "Quiet can be good. Gives you space to hear yourself think." "I keep thinking about what Jake said, that we don't do it alone." He handed her a mug. "He's right. Ranches like ours survive because people show up. That barn didn't raise itself." She sipped the cocoa, thoughtful. "It's weird. Everything looks so different, but it still feels like home." Later that morning, the crew returned, not just volunteers, but also members of the local high school FFA club, off-duty firefighters, and neighbors from as far as 20 miles away. The second wall of the barn was going up, and the beams were stronger than before, reinforced with steel brackets and fire-resistant material. Jake had pulled a few strings to get leftover supplies from a training facility, and even the county commissioner had stopped by to deliver a grant application. Amid the hustle, a surprise visitor arrived, a reporter from a regional agricultural magazine. Word had gotten out about the firefighter who saved a horse, and the story had gained traction online. Jake groaned when he saw the news van, but tolerated the camera, especially when they focused on the community spirit. The reporter, a tall woman with a friendly smile, pulled Emily aside for a quick interview. "I heard Stardust is your horse," she said, "and that he's sort of the hero here." Emily beamed. "He's everything. I was scared he wouldn't make it, but Jake, Captain Lawson, he saved him." The woman smiled. "Would you say he's your best friend?" Emily didn't hesitate. "He's more than that. He's family." Meanwhile, Jake was helping haul heavy planks into position. Despite the media buzz, he stayed focused on the work. After a long afternoon, he finally stepped back and admired the progress. The skeleton of the barn was nearly complete. All around him were the sounds of hope. Hammers striking wood, laughter from kids collecting horseshoes in the field, the low hum of generators powering saws. As dusk approached, Tom invited everyone to stay for dinner. A makeshift potluck came together. Chili in cast-iron pots, cornbread, pies, and cold lemonade. Emily played her harmonica softly by the fire, and Stardust stood behind her like a sentinel, his coat finally brushed clean of soot. Jake sat beside Tom and Sarah, a plate balanced on his knee. "You know," he said between bites, "this barn might be the strongest one in the county when we're done." Tom chuckled. "Stronger because of who helped build it." "And who it was built for," Sarah added, glancing at Emily. The next morning, with the last of the walls in place and rafters secured, Jake made a final suggestion of a weather vane. "But not just any weather vane," he said. "We'll forge one. From the barn nails we pulled out of the fire. Something to remind everyone what we've come through." Tom nodded solemnly. "I know just the guy for the job." A week later, as the barn stood proudly against the backdrop of a mended landscape, the weather vane was installed, a stylized figure of a rearing horse, cut from fire-blackened steel, rising defiantly above the roofline. Emily stood beneath it, hand on Stardust's neck, eyes lifted toward the sky. And for the first time since the fire, she smiled without fear. "We're home," she whispered. And Stardust, as always, stood silently beside her, unwavering. Summer came early to Silver Meadow Ranch that year, bringing with it a rhythm that was both familiar and freshly earned. The sun shone warmer, the grass grew back greener, and the air held not just the memory of fire, but also the scent of cut wood, hay, and the sweet tang of horses in motion. The new barn was more than a building. It was a symbol of perseverance, of unity, of how a community stitches itself back together one nail, one board, one breath at a time. And inside that barn, Stardust had his old stall back, only now with reinforced beams, a misting system for hot days, and a plaque with his name and the date of the fire carved into the wall beside it. Emily had returned to her routines, but something inside her had shifted. She rose before dawn each morning and rode Stardust along the boundary lines of the property, checking fences and watching the hills with a caution she'd never needed before. She carried a walkie-talkie, a compact fire extinguisher in her saddlebag, and she knew exactly where every water source on the ranch was. Jake still visited often. Though the emergency had passed, his bond with the family, and especially with Emily, had only grown stronger. Some days he helped with chores, others he brought fresh supplies or fire prevention tips. Occasionally he just came to listen, sitting on the porch with Tom and Sarah, sipping coffee, while Emily practiced barrel turns with Stardust in the rebuilt arena. One particularly warm afternoon, Jake showed up with an armful of maps and a mischievous grin. "I have an idea," he said, spreading the papers across the kitchen table. Tom raised an eyebrow. "You planning to redraw the county lines?" "Better. We build a fire watch network. Neighbors on high ground with radio gear. We connect ranches, share weather data, fire risk assessments. It's already happening in northern districts. We just bring it here." Sarah leaned in. And you want Silver Meadow to be a hub. Jake nodded. You've already become the symbol of how to survive the worst. Why not be the first line of defense next time? Tom looked to Emily. Her eyes sparkled with the idea. We could call it the Stardust Network, she said. Jake grinned. Has a ring to it. The project launched within a week. Radios were installed, neighbors trained, and the ranch's new weather vane was integrated with a digital weather monitor. Jake helped wire himself. A satellite connection allowed them to upload conditions in real time, and Emily became the unofficial communications officer, logging wind speeds and sending updates during dry spells. As July rolled in, the ranch felt different. Not untouched, not the same, but stronger. Chickens roamed freely again. The cattle had been rotated back into the pastures. The scars on the land had faded under wildflowers and new growth. And Emily, though still young, walked with the gravity of someone who had seen loss and chosen to rebuild. One evening, as the sun melted into the hills and the sky turned the color of ripe peaches, Jake saddled up an old gelding from his station's ranch division and joined Emily on her evening ride. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic beat of hooves grounding them. Then Emily asked, "Do you think it'll ever happen again?" Jake didn't lie. Maybe. Fires are part of this land. But you're more ready now. We all are. She nodded slowly. I just don't want to be scared all the time. You won't be, he said, because now you have the tools and the people. Fear doesn't win when you meet it with preparation. Back at the barn, they unsaddled the horses and walked them to the trough. Stardust nuzzled Jake again, the same way he had on that smoky night. Jake smiled and gave him a firm pat on the neck. Still a hero, he said under his breath. Emily heard it and smiled. Both of you. That night, the barn lights glowed like lanterns in the dark, casting long shadows across the fields. And high above it, the weather vane turned slowly in the wind, its silhouette, a rearing horse, watching over the land it had once fled through, now guarding it in stillness. Silver Meadow Ranch had a new rhythm, one born of fire, tempered by courage, and carried forward by the hoofbeats of Stardust and the unshakable heart of a girl who would never give up. August rolled in with heat, so dry it cracked the soil. The green flush of early summer faded into pale gold, and even the hardy mesquite trees looked thirsty. Emily had taken to checking the fire index daily, her logbook full of wind speed notations and satellite scans. Jake had taught her how to read smoke columns on radar. It had become almost a ritual: sunrise rides, mid-morning data updates, late-day patrols along the ridgelines. Then, one evening, just before sundown, the familiar sound of static burst from the radio in the barn. It wasn't Emily's call sign, nor anyone from the local farms. It was clipped and urgent, barely breaking through the crackle. Smoke north, canyon rim, possible ignition. Emily bolted out the door, her boots pounding the ground as she called for her dad. Jake was already on the line. Confirmed, he said. It started in the old cedar, stands past the bluff. Not near homes yet, but if it jumps the ridge, we've got a problem. Tom turned to Emily. Gear up. You're riding with Jake. She didn't question it. Minutes later, she and Stardust were galloping alongside Jake's unit, the air already tense. Fire wasn't an abstract fear anymore. It had a scent, a sound, a hunger. The canyon fire wasn't big yet. A flare-up from lightning the night before had caught dry brush along the canyon wall, creating a creeping orange glow that painted the rocks like molten glass. The volunteer crews began containment lines, while Jake coordinated air support over the radio. Emily worked the edge zones, her job simple: scout the ravines where the fire might sneak through, and report any signs of embers. Stardust was sure-footed, alert, his muscles tense but steady. Nothing here, she shouted across the gully. Keep looping. Jake called back. Watch the wind. It's shifting east. And then she saw it, just beyond the gully, a low smoldering patch near a dry creek bed, hidden under a fallen juniper. It hadn't caught yet, but it was close. She radioed it in, her voice calm but firm. Jake responded instantly. Mark it and move back. Crews en route. But the wind had other ideas. With a sudden gust, the spark leapt, catching a line of grass like a fuse. The flames danced toward her in a zigzag sprint. Emily turned Stardust hard. Let's go. The horse surged forward, hooves pounding dirt and ash. Smoke curled behind them as they galloped back toward Jake. But halfway down the slope, Stardust stumbled, a rock, loose under his hoof. He regained his balance, but the stumble cost them seconds. Jake saw them coming and ran toward them, shouting. Fire crews formed a buffer zone, but the flame edge was gaining. Jake reached Stardust's bridle just in time, yanking them into a cut between two rocks as a wash of flame shot over the ridge. They crouched, all three pressed into a shallow groove of earth. Jake threw his jacket over Emily's shoulders and kept one arm around Stardust's reins, anchoring him. The fire hissed past like a living thing, angry and loud. Then, just as fast as it had come, it was gone, raced off into the next canyon. They emerged coughing but whole. Jake checked Emily's face, smudged with soot but smiling. You good? Better than good, she said. We stopped it. Jake nodded. You did. The next day, containment lines held. The fire didn't breach the ridge. Back at the ranch, the Stardust network was buzzing. New reports, updated maps, talk of adding more lookout towers. Emily sat beside Stardust in the barn, rubbing his flanks. We did good, didn't we? He nickered softly, lowering his head to nudge her hand. From the porch, Jake watched them with quiet pride. Another fire, another escape. But this time, they were ready. And the horse that once ran from fire now helped others run toward it. Not with fear, but with courage sharpened by purpose. September arrived with a breath of cooler air, but the land still held the tension of a summer scorched too long. Burned scars remained visible in patches across the hillside, reminders that while the fire was contained, its memory lingered. Emily returned to her studies as school resumed, now splitting time between textbooks and weather models. Her teachers, long aware of the fire, welcomed her back with both admiration and a bit of awe. She wasn't just a ranch girl anymore. She was the girl who had ridden into the fire and come out stronger. In town, the Stardust Network had become a reference point. Jake was asked to speak at council meetings, and even state fire management reps visited Silver Meadow to learn how a group of farmers, ranchers, and one brave teenager had created an early warning system out of grit and necessity. But change brings challenges. With attention came scrutiny. A few community members raised concerns about the costs of expanding the network, questioning whether private ranchers should lead something with such widespread implications. One evening, Emily sat with her parents and Jake at the kitchen table, listening as voices crackled over the radio during a town meeting broadcast. We're grateful for what Silver Meadow's done, came one voice. But fire protection is a government job. We need funding, oversight, regulation. Sarah leaned forward, brows knitted. They think we're playing firefighter. Tom shook his head. We did more than play. We saved property, lives. Jake stayed calm. This happens. When something new works, some people resist it. We'll show them we're serious. That this isn't a stunt, it's a model. The next day, Emily proposed a plan, an open ranch day. Invite the community to see the network in action. Demonstrate how weather readings were logged, how the lookout towers operated, how the response drills worked. Preparations began immediately. Jake arranged for the fire department to do a controlled burn demonstration. Tom readied the horses for trail tours. Emily spent hours assembling info boards with photos from the fire, maps, and logs of real-time decisions made during the most critical hours. When the day arrived, families, council members, and reporters flooded the ranch. Children rode ponies, while adults toured the command barn, amazed at the tech. Even skeptics were impressed by how well integrated the network was with regional emergency services. The highlight came when Emily took the mic in front of a crowd gathered near the rebuilt barn. "I'm not a firefighter," she said. "I'm a rancher's daughter." But when the fire came, it didn't ask who we were. It just came. And if we hadn't been ready, if Jake hadn't been there, if Stardust hadn't been willing to trust me, we wouldn't be standing here now. This isn't about replacing anyone. It's about helping, about protecting what we all share. Our land, our homes, our future. The fire gave us a warning. We listened. I hope you will too. The crowd erupted in applause. Jake, standing at the back, couldn't help but smile. He knew bravery when he saw it. And Emily, standing tall beside her horse with the wind lifting her hair, was as brave as they came. That night, under a sky free of smoke, the ranch glowed with lanterns and laughter. People lingered long after sundown, sharing stories, ideas, hopes. The Stardust Network was no longer a rancher's experiment. It was a community's promise. And Emily, still just a girl with a horse, had become something more, a leader shaped by flame, carried forward by courage, and backed by the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on open land. October rolled in with unseasonal warmth and a restlessness in the wind. Emily had been keeping a closer eye on storm patterns. The dry spell was supposed to break, and when it did, it could bring more than relief. It could bring a flood. The fire had left the land exposed. Without the deep roots of trees and grasses, water would run fast and wild across the charred hillsides. Jake had warned the town weeks ago, and Emily had coordinated with nearby ranches, setting up sandbags and identifying evacuation paths. Still, when the storm arrived, it was fiercer than expected. It began as a slow drizzle. Emily stood on the porch with Stardust under the awning, watching the sky ripple with dark clouds. By nightfall, it turned into a full-blown downpour. Thunder shook the windows, and the dry creeks, once safe trails, began to churn with water. The radio crackled to life. Jake's voice came through, sharp and urgent. Flash flood warning. East slope. Multiple washouts. One vehicle reported missing near Mill Creek. Need all available hands. Tom and Emily didn't hesitate. Tom hitched the trailer while Emily saddled Stardust, tying her raincoat tight. Lightning forked across the sky as they pulled out, water already streaming across the ranch road. At the canyon pass, chaos waited. Mudslides had knocked out the service road, and a pickup was stuck near the embankment, its driver waving desperately from the roof as water surged around it. Jake was already there, soaked to the bone, coordinating with rescue crews. "We can't reach him by foot," someone shouted. "Too deep." Emily didn't wait for permission. She turned to Jake. "Stardust can do it." Jake hesitated, eyes on the swirling water. "It's dangerous." "He's strong. He's done worse. I can get a rope to him." Tom started to protest, but Jake put a hand on his shoulder. "Let her go." With a nod, Emily mounted. Stardust pawed the mud, sensing the current ahead. Then they moved, step by step, into the torrent. The water pushed hard. Debris floated past, and the ground beneath them shifted. But Stardust held firm. He lowered his head and powered forward, muscles bunching with each surge. Emily's focus narrowed to the stranded driver. She could see his terrified eyes, his arms waving wildly. "Hang on," she called, flinging the rope toward him. It took 2 tries. The third time, he caught it. Jake and the others pulled from the other side, the rope stretching taut as Emily and Stardust braced against the pull. The truck began to shift, but the man was clear, clambering hand over hand toward safety. With the rope released, Emily guided Stardust back through the current, both horse and rider soaked, shaking, but standing tall. Cheers broke out as they reached the edge. Jake ran to her, pulling her down from the saddle into a hug. "You did it," he said. "So did he." Emily turned to Stardust, who stood calmly, as if daring the storm to do its worst. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving deep scars on the land, but no lives lost. The news spread quickly. The girl and her horse, who once fled fire, had now braved a flood. The town's skepticism vanished. That afternoon, as Emily led Stardust back to the barn, she found a new sign hanging above the gate. "Stardust Ranch, fire and flood strong." Emily smiled, brushing her hand across the smooth wood. The storms would keep coming, fire, water, wind. But so would she. Because strength wasn't the absence of fear. It was riding straight into it, and coming out the other side. The first frost dusted the grass in silver, and the air held that sharp, early bite of winter. The land was quieter now, resting, regrowing. The scars from the fire and flood hadn't disappeared, but neither had the strength built in their wake. Emily spent her mornings patrolling the new tree lines they'd planted in September. Tiny green shoots poked from the ash-rich soil, stubborn in their survival. Every sapling felt like a promise. Stardust walked beside her, no saddle needed. Their connection had deepened into something unspoken. He followed her, without question now. Not out of training, but trust. Jake was preparing to transfer to another unit. A wildfire response program in Montana had asked for experienced firefighters with boots-on-the-ground knowledge of rural firebreak networks. He'd initially said no. But Emily, watching him polish his gear, had nodded. "You should go," she told him. Jake raised a brow. "You sure?" She smiled. "You taught us what we need to know. We can carry it from here." He looked at her, really looked. A girl-turned-young woman, scarred but whole. "Steady. You'll do more than carry it. You'll lead it." Jake left on a cold morning in November, the community gathering to see him off. There were hugs, handshakes, and more than a few tears. But no goodbyes. Just gratitude. In his absence, the town formally adopted the Stardust Network as its official early warning system. Emily was elected coordinator, the youngest ever to hold a civil response role in the county. One evening, while reviewing logs at her desk, she noticed a packet tucked in the last file Jake had left. Inside was a photograph, her and Stardust, silhouetted by firelight the night they made it out of the canyon. On the back, Jake had written, "Courage is earned. You earned yours." She framed it and hung it above the barn door. As winter deepened, the ranch kept moving. Fences repaired, livestock sheltered. The rhythms of rural life continued. But something had shifted in Silver Meadow. The community no longer waited for disaster. It prepared. And always, Emily and Stardust were there. On the ridges, in the storms, beneath the wide, endless sky. Not because they wanted to be heroes, but because they knew what it meant to protect what mattered. Fire had forged them. Flood had tested them. But it was love for land, for life, for each other, that would define their legacy. And that legacy would ride on, forever forward.